I am today announcing my candidacy for the presidency of the United States.
The most important words of my life.
I'm here tonight.
I stand
before you today
to declare that I am a candidate
for President of the United States.
I am running
for President of the United States.
I officially announce my candidacy
for President of the United States.
I'm running for president.
I am officially running
for President of the United States.
From the University of Virginia Center for Politics, this is Sabato's Crystal Ball, America Votes.
The American system of democracy is still very much an experiment.
Democracy has been somewhat discredited.
That system, it is the most successful democratic system the world has I think, ever seen.
I experienced the American dream. There's no other country in the world that I could have created from nothing where I am today.
This isn't the land of the free. That hasn't been the experience of many people.
There is an existential threat in the world right now.
We're facing one of the great ideological battles of our time.
Global democracy really depends on a strong American democracy.
The way that democracies die today is not the way it died 50 or 60 years ago. We usually think of a violent takeover, seizure of power. Today, the dominant way in which democracies die is much more subtle.
Really, populists rise to power through election.
It's not easy. Democracy is hard.
We have to fight for it every day.
We have to pay attention. We have to take a stand. We cannot assume someone will do it for us.
If this system continues without reform, I think there is a very real possibility of violence and potentially a split in the United States.
And if we lose faith in that system, then we have to be content with whatever comes along. And literally anything could come along.
When I was a little kid, my dad used to say to me all the time, when we faced oppression in Cuba, I had a place to flee to. If we lose our freedom here, where do we go?
Welcome, everyone, to the 10th Crystal Ball webinar from the University of Virginia Center for Politics. We have appreciated so much all the feedback we've gotten from you all and good questions. And we have a wonderful substitute co-anchor of the webinar today. I should mention that Kyle Kondik, who's normally here, said he couldn't make it. I was very upset. But then I heard the reason and I went ahead and gave him permission. He and his wife are today having their first baby. Now, their priorities, and I think this Crystal Ball website is a higher priority, but then it's not my baby. And substituting for Kyle in every other way and doing all the work, really, for me and Kyle is Miles Coleman. And he didn't have time to do this because we gave him so much work to do. So I'm delighted to say that we have really a famous person. And she has many, many titles. You've seen her on every network imaginable. But the title that really matters is Visiting Scholar at the UVA Center for Politics, Tara Setmeyer. Tara, welcome. Thank you for doing this. And that baby would thank you if the baby talked, but the baby doesn't.
Thank you, Larry. I'm thrilled to be here with you. I'm thrilled to be a part of the Center for Politics this academic year. And what a time to be as a fill-in for the Crystal Ball. We're so close to this insane election. So the timing couldn't be better. I'm thrilled to be here.
Well, we're thrilled to have you.
Thank you so much. And I, on top of being a part of the Center for Politics, I'm also thrilled that I've had the opportunity to be the voice behind the amazing documentary that UVA has put out in partnership with VPM, Dismantling Democracy. And I'm thrilled to find out that Dismantling Democracy is now available on Amazon Prime. So for all of the folks out there who want an opportunity to take a look at our 3-part series on democracy, check it out. We're on Amazon Prime, and you can watch it anytime you like. And not only see Larry and the other amazing contributors, but you also get to hear my lovely voice narrating the 3-part series. So that's great news and very exciting that that it's made it to Amazon.
Well, all I can say, Tara, is you're so good at selling things, listening to you, that I expect a fourth career for you on TV, hawking this, that, and the other. And they make fortunes, by the way. Maybe you could replace Flo. We're all sick of Flo. Okay, you would make a much better Flo. Sorry, Flo.
I don't know. I don't know if selling insurance is in my wheelhouse of expertise, but I'm happy to continue to spread the word on fighting for freedom and having fun and making sure that our democracy is intact moving forward.
That's enough on your plate. No question. That's enough.
Oh my goodness. So we are streaming this show on YouTube. It's October 22nd, and we are less than 2 weeks away from Election Day, which is just remarkable. And, as I mentioned that over the course of the 3-hour series on dismantling democracy, where we lay so much of the groundwork about the state of democracy in this country, and not only in the US, but around the world. And it offers so many different perspectives on the political spectrum that the timing couldn't be better for that as well as our conversation now. So for those of us who are watching, you can watch us on the YouTube channel, the UVA Center for Politics YouTube channel. So please remember to subscribe if you have not subscribed, and you can get notifications for future programs moving forward. You can also text UVA. So if you'd like to support this broadcast and other work of the Center for Politics, you can text USA Votes to 41444 to receive additional instructions on how to do that. Again, that's USA Votes at 41444. We also have a podcast. Today's show is available as a podcast on on iTunes, Spotify, and most other platforms, or you can download it from the website directly. Go to centerforpolitics.org. That's centerforpolitics.org, and click on the podcast icon at the top of the page. So, Larry, we have so much to get into for today's show. A little later, we're going to be joined by John Dean, author of the new book, Authoritarian Nightmare. And we're going to close the show with former U.S. Senator Bill Nelson from Florida. And I'm excited about the John Dean interview. He has such an amazing place in history, his role during Watergate, and his book, Authoritarian Nightmare, has become a bit of a survival guide for me on what the attitudes behind Trump supporters and what's happening in this creeping toward authoritarianism. So definitely stay tuned for that interview with John Dean coming up. But before we do all of that, we have to do what people came to see, which is the crystal ball. And Larry, we've had several changes over the weeks in your crystal ball prognostications, and particularly this week, we're going to talk about the Senate. The big headline here is that the crystal ball is changing the Iowa Senate race from toss-up to leans Democratic. Let's talk about that. What is going on in the great state of Iowa?
Well, Tara, it's our tradition at the Crystal Ball to be very, very foolish and to call every race, every single one in every state in the presidential contest, even if we're not sure. As I said, that could be defined as brave or as stupid. It's up to you. Maybe it's both brave and stupid. But we had 2 toss-ups remaining, and we still have one, North Carolina, because we are continuing to watch there for fallout from this sexting scandal of the Democratic candidate, Cal Cunningham. So far, it seems to have had little to no effect, and that could end up being the critical Senate seat. However, Iowa could also end up being the critical Senate seat. The reason we decided to give the edge to Teresa Greenfield over Senator Joni Ernst, a freshman Republican, is because Greenfield has consistently led, not by much, but pretty consistently. She's up 2, 3 points, 4 points, something like that. She's actually doing better than Joe Biden in this era of very partisan voting where people tend not to ticket split. And I've asked people who are involved in that race, what is it that causes Greenfield to do better than Joe Biden? And invariably, they say she's a very fresh, dynamic candidate, comes across well in her ads and on the stump, and that for whatever combination of reasons, there's a bit of Joni Ernst fatigue. So maybe that will make a difference. Maybe in the end, Trump will win Iowa by enough to pull Joni Ernst in. And I think that's a good 45% probability. We picked the 55%, at least 13 days out. Now, the real question is, will Trump win Iowa? Because that may well determine the Senate race. Right now, it is absolutely dead tied, even a little bit more than Ohio, which is also surprisingly close. We have a hard time thinking Ohio will not go for Trump in the end. But Iowa really could go either way, even though they voted for Trump by a wide margin in 2016, as did Ohio. So this one was a complicated choice. There was a lot of arguing. One of our three members was on the losing side. I'm not going to identify that person, except that it wasn't you. And so we're just going to see what happens there. But it's a critical race. It puts us at 50 Democratic seats, 49 Republican seats, one undecided, being, of course, North Carolina. So if the Democrats win the presidency and the vice presidency, then Vice President Kamala Harris will break the tie in the Senate for organization and everything else, assuming it's 50-50. Maybe it'll go higher than that for either side.
Of course, that would just add to the political intrigue of this election cycle. If we ended up through all of this with a 50-50 tie in the Senate, you might as well just add that to the script of this insane election cycle. I wanted to ask you about South Carolina, because a lot of folks have had interest in this. The Jamie Harrison versus Lindsey Graham race has raised an enormous amount of money on the part of Jamie Harrison. He just reported $58 million in the last quarter to $27 million for Lindsey Graham. Lindsey Graham has been basically reduced to begging for money on right-wing media because he's being outspent so badly. And the race is pretty close. I mean, Lindsey Graham, the fact that Lindsey Graham is fighting for his political life in Ruby Red, South Carolina against Jamie Harrison is pretty remarkable. You still have that race as likely R, but do you see any opportunity for Jamie Harrison to maybe pull this thing out?
Yeah, there's a chance. We actually have it, I think, or we're going to, as leans R. Maybe I gave something away. But it's so close in the polls, at least. It is tied. Occasionally, Harrison even leads Graham by a point, though that's not statistically significant. And then, as you mentioned, the money situation, which really tells you how angry Democrats across the country are at Lindsey Graham for breaking his promise about the Supreme Court nominee. You know, he was absolutely certain they would never do this for Trump, just to put another Republican on the Supreme Court. And then what happened, we all know. Graham, though, has an ace in the hole, and it has nothing to do with him, really. It's Donald Trump's margin in South Carolina. Unless there's a total collapse for Trump, and I don't believe there will be, there hasn't been over 4 years, he will carry South Carolina 7, 9, 10 points, maybe more. And that's more than enough to pull Graham in. Harrison deserves a lot of credit, though, because he's run a race that, at least in the beginning, people thought wouldn't even be close, would barely be mentioned. And he's raised that incredible sum of money, a record that will last for at least 2 or 3 weeks, the way we're breaking fundraising records. But it's a terrific total. He deserves all the credit in the world. But South Carolina is a tough nut to crack if you're a Democrat. That will not always be true with our changing demographics, but it's probably true in 2020.
You know, what's interesting about that race in South Carolina is that it is really garnered national attention because Lindsey Graham is, for the Democrats, despised. And it's your mentioning of the Supreme Court, the impact of the Supreme Court nomination, and using Lindsey Graham's own words against him, where he said, "Use my words against me," which was probably political malpractice at that point if you're planning on breaking your promise. And you know, my mom, who is a suburban white woman voter in the state of New Jersey, actually sent money to Jamie Harrison because she is so disgusted with Lindsey Graham. And my mom is a lifelong Republican, but not a Trump supporter. She's a never Trumper. And she couldn't wait to send money to Jamie Harrison, to send Lindsey Graham packing. And apparently she's not alone, given the amount of money that's come into that race. So the interest in that race is fascinating to me. And also,
I was going to say, your mother is now our sample voter.
Yes, right.
But we're going to have to interview her. Okay.
She's probably statistically insignificant given her demographics in New Jersey, but which is a pretty blue state. But the point of me bringing that up is that's how far the reach is in interest in this South Carolina race down there, and why so much money is going into it, because it's not just folks in South Carolina that seem to be over Lindsey Graham. Another race I wanted to ask you about, which is fascinating, and especially for those of us who really study political trends, is Texas and what's happening there. Texas has been a white whale of sorts to Democrats for so long. It hasn't gone blue in a presidential race since 1976. Senator Cornyn is actually in a much tighter race than I think anybody would have expected. And the fact that Democrats are putting any money whatsoever into Texas, and there's a couple $1 million are going in there, is also fascinating. Can you talk a little bit about what's happening in Texas and why Texas is even on the map here, why it's even on the radar as somewhere where Democrats would spend money?
Sure. I like your analogy there to the white whale. I guess I would say Democrats have been waiting for Godot since Jimmy Carter carried Texas in 1976. And that was the last Democrat who did for president anyway. And, we need to remember Ted Cruz only won by 2.5 points over Beto O'Rourke. I mean, that was very, very close in 2018. And everybody said, oh, well, that's just an exception to the rule. It was all Ted Cruz. Well, I think what's happening there this year proves it wasn't just all Ted Cruz. There are basic demographic changes occurring in Texas that will actually make it a competitive state, not always a Democratic state, but a competitive state in years to come. Now, will it happen this year? Probably not, but we're paying attention to it. I didn't think we'd be talking about Texas at the beginning of the year, certainly for president, probably not for Senate either. I'd still have to give the edge to John Cornyn. It's so tough to beat an incumbent who hasn't gotten into serious trouble. And Cornyn, of course, is a former judge, and he tends to be judicial in temperament, or at least his words. He recently goofed by talking about women who marry men they don't really like because they think they can change them after they're married. Well, that's a great line for the 1990s. And I remember the 1990s. It was a lot of fun, but I'm just saying it doesn't really fit in 2020. But everybody makes mistakes. I've made one or two in my lifetime. I don't know about you, Tara.
Oh, I've made plenty. And
one, maybe one.
Yeah, more than one. But that makes you a better person, right? You learn from your mistakes. And I don't think John Cornyn will be making comments like that anymore. But it speaks to the problems that Republicans are having with suburban women. Even suburban women in Texas are shying away from Republicans in numbers that should alarm them, considering that the blue wave in 2018 was really led by suburban women in areas across the country. And if you see how many Republican members of Congress who lost their seats in areas outside of Houston and Dallas, that trend line is not going in the opposite direction for Republicans. It's not going the way they want. And when you have a senator making comments like that, it doesn't help Republicans. It just furthers this hemorrhaging of support that Republicans are losing from suburban women in many areas. And it seems as though Texas is even somewhere that's not immune to this. I'm fascinated by it. And I'm going to pay attention, because even the margins, even if Republicans still continue to win in Texas, the margins will matter, because it may be an inevitability that Texas becomes purple, which is making a lot of souls shake in the national party for Republicans, and also in Texas. I think they see the writing on the wall. It's fascinating. So you mentioned North Carolina, which leaves us with North Carolina. What's going on there as the final toss-up Senate race in the crystal ball? And What do you think is going to happen there? I mean, the sexting scandal, which is shocking because I remember the 90s also, and this would have destroyed a candidate in North Carolina. It would have been over. Not in the the days of Donald Trump and him surviving the Access Hollywood tape. So, and the Trump campaign is putting a lot of money into North Carolina. That's another area where a state that they believe they absolutely need to win. So what do you think will happen there in North Carolina as we're heading down the final stretch here?
In my mind, and maybe my mind is rerunning past campaigns. That's always a danger when you've been around too long. But North Carolina, I grew up on the Virginia-North Carolina border. So, and most of my news seemed to be from North Carolina. So I've known North Carolina for a long time. And this just, in my mind, is not a state that Trump is likely to lose unless he is losing by kind of a blowout. It doesn't have to be a technical landslide, which is 10 points. Could be 6 or 7, much like Obama beat McCain with in 2008. It's a state that's really built for somebody like Donald Trump. Certainly in the 2016 race, but even this one. But here's what's changing my mind to a certain degree. First, the governor, the incumbent Democratic governor, is going to win not a landslide, but it will be a wide margin. And North Carolinians are not hesitant about tossing out their governors or their senators. They've done it many times. Tom Tillis has never been all that popular. This has been a 6-year phenomenon. He's never really climbed out of the basement. It was enough to win in a heavily Republican year of 2014. But this is a different kind of year. And it's tough to change your image once it's settled over 6 years. You've had 6 years to change your image or to build up a new image. And Gary Peterson, the Democratic senator from Michigan, is another example of this, having problems because maybe he didn't use his 6 years as well as he should have. But getting back to the actual race, Cunningham cuts a dashing figure, but a lot of that was image. Military background, lovely family. He can't have the wife and the kids in the picture anymore, right. And it makes it tougher. So what surprised me is that we haven't seen any substantial deterioration in Cunningham's position. And that may mean that enough North Carolinians are basically saying, we're past that era. We're not going to consider it more than a bit. There are other concerns that we have that are more powerful. Maybe that's what's going on. But in the end, I think it'll be determined by which candidate wins North Carolina presidentially. There'll be a coattail effect one way or the other.
Before we move on to the debate and what we need to look for, I have a question about the impact that Donald Trump's comments on disparaging the military may be having in some of these states, because you're looking at really large military populations in North Carolina, in South Carolina, in Texas, in Georgia, all places that were not necessarily in play for Democrats in past election cycles, that are way more in play for them now. Do you think that there's any correlation? Because it's the last poll I saw showed that there was a tie with military households between Biden and Trump. Do you see any correlation between some of those areas I just mentioned being in play more so than usual because of Trump's attacks on the military?
Absolutely. I mentioned the border. I grew up in Norfolk, Virginia, and that's a heavily military area.
Right.
The newest poll out on the close competitive House race down there has the Democrat up by 7 points. And that should have, she's running against the incumbent, that is Congressman Luria, is running against a former Republican member of the House from that district that she beat 2 years ago in a big Democratic year. And I do think the fact that she is military, she's got a military background, is helping her. But what's also helping her is that Donald Trump has turned off a piece of the military community. He doesn't seem to understand that. He thinks they all love him And it's true, the ones gathered together for his speeches always applaud wildly. And the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, I believe it was, went with him very foolishly, very unwisely to the church, and when Trump held up the Bible. But I don't think that is as representative of the military as it was earlier in Trump's term.
Yeah, that was an inflection point, I think, in this campaign where it came to military families. I mean, we've seen Donald Trump use the military as political props in the past, but a lot of the tough talk that he had about bringing troops home, and I think military families thought, okay, he's on our side here. But once you saw the way that he used the Joint Chiefs chairman during that Lafayette Square violent clearing out on June 1st this year, and then you saw something remarkable happen where you saw General Mattis come to speak out. Now Admiral McRaven, who was the leader of the SEAL Team 6 operation, and other military figures coming out in large numbers over the summer, basically saying that Donald Trump's unfit to be commander-in-chief. That's something you never see. So I think that might have been the inflection point where more military families were starting to take a look at this from a different way. And that's another fascinating metric that I don't think we've seen with a Republican president incumbent in office that may have an impact on the presidential race moving forward, particularly in those military states.
Yes.
So we have a debate. This is was supposed to be the third and final debate happening tonight. Ended up being only the second debate now because Donald Trump pulled out of the virtual debate after his COVID diagnosis. And if it still happens, as of right now, it's still happening. You just quite never know until he steps in front of the camera. Trump has been complaining about this. He's complaining about Kristen Welker, the moderator tonight. He's complaining about the subjects. So a lot of complaining ahead of time coming from him, not coming from the Biden camp, but coming from the Trump camp. What will you be watching for in tonight's debate?
I think this will surprise some people, but since 32 million, somewhere around there, people have already voted. Remember, they're out of the picture. They can watch, but they're watching for entertainment. They can't go get their ballots back. It's over for them. And then there are tens of millions more who know exactly who they're going to vote for. And they're simply tuning in to cheer for their side, to cheer for their candidate, to cheer for their team. So you really have almost nobody left. It's such a tiny splinter of the electorate that is actually undecided. And it's hard to believe anybody could really be truly undecided. They've had Donald Trump for 5 years, counting the campaign. Who doesn't have an opinion on Donald Trump? So I tend to think it will have less influence than debates often do. And people always say, unless somebody makes a horrible mistake. What could they possibly say or do? Maybe unveiling themselves as, advocates of Stalin, or the old Soviet Union. Maybe instead of saying Russia, they say the Soviet Union. I don't know. But it's hard to imagine anything really changing the superstructure of this campaign. Now, will there be a lot of yelling and screaming and back and forth? If the debate commission thinks that muting the mics for 2 minutes for the opening statements for each of the subjects will really matter, they're terribly naive. Because first of all, Trump can yell across the platform, whether he has a mic or not. It'll probably be picked up by Biden's. But there's all that other time in discussion. Trump is outraged. You can tell he's outraged at everybody and everything because he's losing. But he's particularly outraged at the debate commission and the way that has been handled. And he's going to take it all out tomorrow. He's going to talk as his last chance. He's there on the stage. The election's just in the future. He might lose. This could be one of his biggest audiences and last chances to say everything he thinks. So we could get a treat, if you call it that, in that direction, bearing his soul. And of course, he never does that. We never know what he's really thinking, do we? We've only had 10,000 tweets. I've forgotten how many he's generated in 4 years. But it's worth watching for the show. I don't think anybody should make up their minds based on a debate. I really don't. We're beyond that. When you've got an incumbent president, you got a 4-year term to analyze.
You'd be surprised at how many people before the era of Trump didn't really pay attention to anything that was going on until the debates,
Yes.
which is why, for those of us who have been in politics for a long time prior to Trump, focused so much on the presidential debates. It's why they were make or break. If you look at the momentum for momentum purposes, you look what happened in 2012, where Barack Obama didn't have a great debate. Mitt Romney looked fantastic in that debate, and the momentum was in his favor at that point. And then the second debate came around. Obama got his mojo back and wiped the floor with Mitt Romney, and he never recovered after that. And Obama sailed to re-election in 2012. First debates traditionally don't go well for the incumbent. Ronald Reagan had a terrible first debate against Mondale the first time, for people who remember that. And he recovered from it, and had his famous line about, "I'm not going to exploit my opponent's youth or inexperience," which was wonderful. And we still kind of look for those one-liners. But to your point, I don't think it matters anymore. Those old colloquialisms and political conventional wisdom, it just doesn't apply unless there is a major, major faux pas or mistake that could swing it. But I don't see how this debate changes anything. We know, what you're going to get with Donald Trump. He could say that he longs for the glory days of the Soviet Union, and it wouldn't matter. We hear him use the language of Stalin and authoritarians all the time when he attacks the press is the enemy of the people, which was something that was a direct quote used by those authoritarians, or when he says that his political opponent should be jailed. It's a great prelude for our next guest, John Dean, who wrote the book Authoritarian Nightmare. We see this language happening all the time, and it seems as though the American people are becoming desensitized to it. So even in your example, Larry, I don't think it would matter.
I agree. It would just be sloughed off. Nobody's going to change their vote based on that. It would have to be a total meltdown. And even there, 1,000 votes at most, I think.
Yeah, that's not a lot, considering that we're already at 1/4. 25% of the overall vote from 2016 has already been cast as of this broadcast. Early voting. That is remarkable. I think we're going to see record-setting voter participation this time around, which is always a good thing, right, Larry? The more folks we have in democracy, the better. So keep it up, folks. Keep that voting going. All right. I think next up, we're going to bring in our next guest, and that is John Dean. Our first guest today is John Dean. John Dean served as a counsel to the President of the United States from July 1970 to April 1973. Before becoming White House counsel to President Nixon at age 31, he was the chief minority counsel to the Judiciary Committee of the U.S. House of Representatives and an associate deputy attorney general at the U.S. Department of Justice. He studied undergrad at Colgate University and the College of Worcester, with majors in English literature and political science, then a graduate fellowship at American University to study government and the presidency before receiving his law degree at Georgetown University. John held the Barry Goldwater Chair of American Institutions at Arizona State University from 2015 to 2016. And for the past decade and a half, he's been a visiting scholar and lecturer at the University of Southern California's Annenberg School of Communications. John is a CNN contributor and analyst and teaches continuing legal education programs examining the impact of the American Bar Association's model rules of professional conduct on select historic events from Watergate, which he knows a little bit about, and the Trump presidency. He has recently written about his days at the Nixon White House and Watergate in 3 books, Blind Ambition, Lost Honor, and the Nixon Defense, and now has a new book out, which he co-authored with Bob Altmaier, titled Authoritarian Nightmare, Trump and His Followers. John Dean, welcome so much to the Crystal Ball with us here at the UVA Center for Politics. Larry Sabato, take it away.
Thanks, Tara.
Thank you, Tara. John, it's an honor to have you here. Known you a bit over the years. I know we've interviewed you for films before, but course, as a young man, I remember you at Watergate. I think you came to the defense of the Republic, and you're trying to do it again in a very interesting way. This book is a layered study. It's a thorough study. It doesn't scream as so many of the books about Donald Trump do. And we all know Trump does induce screaming in loads and loads of people, both for him and against him. But I was intrigued by this. The first thing I want to ask you is, how would you define Trump as an authoritarian? And is there any difference with his followers, or are they preparing to be authoritarian, or are they already authoritarian?
I guess the quickest way I'd define Trump is he's a poster boy for authoritarianism. Larry, there are actually three types of authoritarian personalities. In doing this book, my collaborator and I talked about it, and we decided to stay away from the governmental political science view of authoritarianism, which is, what various political and governmental structural and partisan type of activities can result in authoritarian government. This isn't a book about that. This isn't a book about democracy backsliding into authoritarianism. This is a book about the kind of people who are attracted to authoritarianism. Donald Trump is a conspicuous authoritarian personality. His competitors in 2016, you'll recall, Lindsey Graham, Ted Cruz, they were very quick to call him a demagogue. A demagogue is obviously just another name for an authoritarian personality. We've had them in our history. We've actually had authoritarian presidents. My interest in authoritarianism results directly from my working from our last authoritarian president, Richard Nixon, who was not a demagogue, but behind closed doors, and because of his tapes, we know he was truly an authoritarian personality. So what are the three types of personalities, if I can give them to you in a nutshell? There's something that social scientists call social dominators, who have dominating personalities. They oppose equality and really prefer inequality with them in charge. They don't compromise easily, and they're also desirous of personal power. Those traits will get them qualified in social science as social dominators. Then there are the much broader studied group known as right-wing authoritarian followers. And these are people who submit to authority and become aggressive on behalf of that authority. And otherwise, they're very conventional people. This is where the bulk of the study has been going on. About the last 4-5 decades, these people have been intensely looked at. It really started in an earlier form, post-World War II, when some German Jews immigrated to Berkeley and started studying authoritarianism, asking, could it happen here? They decided it could. Most recently, they have really developed clear patterns for another type of third personality. And those are people who show traits of both being social dominators and followers. In other words, they want to dominate, but they will be willing to follow so they can dominate. A very recent example of that is Mark Meadows. Mark Meadows came into the Tea Party. He was a thump-chesting alpha dog, if you will, in charge of that whole show, moved over to the Freedom Caucus, and now he's given up all that power, and he's submitting clearly to Donald Trump. You can't be the alpha dog and work for Donald Trump. That's pretty obvious. So he is what we'd call a double high. He has the traits of both a social dominator and a right-wing authoritarian follower. And these are the most dangerous kind. These are the least able to work within a democratic structure. So that's a broad picture of the people we deal with that social science has really been studying, and did this book because nobody was looking at this science or these people. And they're out there, and they're about a third of our electorate. So we better understand them.
And that's frightening. A third of the electorate. By the way, I saw some of them in Charlottesville a few years ago.
Yes, you have. Those are probably double highs or would be social dominators.
Well, they'll be right there with Trump if he calls on them for action after the election. And that's my second question for you, John. Let's suggest that Donald Trump loses the election, at least as we would define losing, but it was relatively close, a few percentage points. There are enough examples, tiny examples of voter fraud. They're always, when you have 150 million people voting, you're always going to be able to find a few dozen here and 10 over there that have done something wrong. So Trump will use those examples. How will he approach this based on his authoritarian character? What will he do you think?
Well, getting into Trump's mind is not easy, and I don't know any body of science yet that is very reliable at doing that. The pattern would be, and what we polled for was how much would his followers tolerate, and that's one of the guides that would tell us what could happen. Because this science was developed largely on university campuses, with undergraduates being the first targets, then their parents, then people in the university community, we decided we needed to test it. And I have been friendly for years and happened to be doing a program at Monmouth University where Pat Murray has set up the Monmouth Polling Institute, which, as you know, has been one of the best in the business.
It is.
He was fascinated by this study we were undertaking and agreed to do polling or surveys here in the United States on a broad basis. We started first in New Jersey, where that is based. Let me get this call off. Sorry about that. We started first in New Jersey, where Monmouth is based, and we tested about 900 people. And that was really to develop the platform, which was the best way to do this: telephone calls, in person, or could we do it online? To make a long story short, it was discovered the platform that worked best was online, where we not only get the polling answers we wanted, but we administer 5 different personality tests. And this is the way we were able to find out the authoritarian nature of the people taking the test. It was a broad, cross-the-board sample. Once we had the success in New Jersey, and it was quite startling, the results, we went national. And we had from a pool of about 230,000, we selected 990, skewing a little bit towards the Republican side because we wanted to understand Trump's base in particular. But we didn't distort the sample at all, just skewed it a little bit that way. And those results were really quite remarkable. They were given tests for social domination, for right-wing authoritarianism, and to test for double highs. And Bob Altmaier, who has spent his life doing this, it was kind of a eureka event for him because it confirmed a lifetime of scientific work, that everything he had been doing he had done a few American cities and he'd done state legislators, and which was a very revealing test also, but never done the voting population, and certainly not in any broad scale. So we tested from Trump lovers to Trump haters and found out that it's one of the things that came out back clear is the Republican Party today is the authoritarian party. We found the glue that holds these people together, Larry, is prejudice. They are highly prejudiced people. This doesn't surprise us because this is what the science has shown for a long time. Now, all that to get back to your question, what's Trump going to do if he loses? If he wins, first of all, it's Katie bar the door. I don't know. Democracy as we know it, I think, is gone if Trump gets 4 more years. System can't take a guy like him. He just plays by none of the norms, none of the rules. He's above the law. The Republicans have become spineless. And if they aren't there to check him, democracy, as I say, as we know it, is gone. I'm assuming that Biden will win. And so what's Trump going to do about it? And he's somewhat limited by what his followers will let him do about it. A relatively small percentage, somewhere between 19 and 24%, depending on which question it dealt with, as to how much they would tolerate of sort of shenanigans, claiming it was a rigged election. There is some room there. That would be several million people that would let him stir up trouble. But if there is a tsunami election, that's not going to happen. If it's a close election, he can probably cause problem, even violence.
Of course, at the end, and you were watching carefully as one presidency ended back in the 1970s. Once it's January 20th, he can simply be ushered out of the White House by the Secret Service, military, a combination of people, one would assume.
Well, the beauty of our system, Larry, of course, is his term ends by the Constitution. So he no longer has power come January 21st or January 20th at noon. Power transfers automatically. If Biden has been determined by the vote count in the House and the Senate, the joint session, it's over. If Trump can stay in the White House as long as he wants, he's not president, but he's a trespasser then. So they can get him out any way they want to. But he's no longer commander in chief. That's the important thing.
This would be the ultimate trespassing case, no question.
You're right.
It would be. And if it's not resolved, people seem to forget. Let's say he does stir up all kinds of trouble, and we don't have a resolution of who is president by January 20th. Well, we do have a statute that makes it very clear who becomes acting president. Speaker Pelosi will be acting president.
What a nightmare for the Trump people.
It's a nightmare for the Trump people. I think it's fine. I think she'd be great.
Well, could
you imagine?
Could
you imagine if that's where it went?
Trump out. She'd probably move Trump's possessions out too. She wouldn't stop with him.
I would pay money to see that, Larry. To see Nancy Pelosi kicking Trump out by pulling him by his ear right on out of the White House. I have a quick question for John about the Trump supporters, because I read your book and it was like a survival guide for me, very illuminating, because a lot of people wonder, because we look at that, those of us who are not Trump followers, we look at this situation and what's happened with Trump supporters and how irrational they are and how impossible it is to have conversations with them about Trump and the things that he does and why they tolerate it. You know, it's the I could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue phenomenon. And when I got to chapter 5, where you break down the 3 types of people, starting with the social dominators, I was shocked, probably the way Bob Altmaier was, about how many people were willing to tolerate this and where this stems from. And that the idea of the ethnocentrism of these supporters and their worry about being replaced, and how their position in the country is being challenged. And it's that fear and that ethnic grievance that drives a lot of them, and how they're willing to really disregard what our tenets of democracy are, about what Thomas Jefferson put in the Declaration and what we have in our Constitution, that those democratic foundations are actually not that important to these people. Can you talk a little bit about how that relationship between these people and Trump supporters, and why that's such a threat to our democracy?
That's a nice summary, Tara, of that material. That is the heart of the book. What we couldn't figure out is why nobody was talking about who these people are that are attracted to Trump, and who the hell are they that they would tolerate this kind of behavior, his norm-busting, anti-democratic behavior, particularly after the arrival of COVID-19, where they just don't seem to care if he's killing millions of people. They don't care. So it's quite striking, given the fact there are two pillars to his base. One are white men without a 4-year college education, and the other larger pillar of his base are religious right, or either born again or white evangelicals and white born again. And that's the larger base. And these people, we do a special chapter just on the religious people, because he's the antithesis of what they teach and preach, yet they embrace him and are willing to follow him. And so why is that? Well, let's go first with the religious group, because Altmaier had spent a long time studying these people and knew them very well. And there are countless academic scientific studies that show there's really no correlation between Christianity and morality, unfortunately. They talk a good game, they don't always play as good a game. The other thing that Altmaier discovered in a decade or so of testing these people is they're willing to chuck their religion for some short-term goal, like getting people on a court when they think a case should be overruled, or they want their way of life to be embraced on a much broader governmental basis. So that's what they've done here. They have made the trade-off. Not necessarily all their leaders, but their leaders have often been pushed aside by the flock. And that explains what's happened with the religious right and the fundamentalists, that they're there. Trump appeals to them. So they have chucked their religion pretty much to the wayside to get what they think he can give them. The other people, what I did when I was doing my prior book on this subject back in 2006, I did a book called Conservatives Without Conscience. And I prepared some laundry lists of how the traits of social dominators and the traits of right-wing authoritarians follow. And I'm going to share those with you because I think they're very telling. What happened is this book, when Trump arrived, people discovered this book and kept getting emails saying, you really anticipated Trump. You really described his personality before he even arrived. Let me give you the typical profile of a social dominator. They're typically men. They're dominating personalities. They oppose equality. They're desirous of personal power and amoral. Those are the qualifying criteria to even fit in that category. But when they're tested, they also show they're intimidating and bullying. They're faintly hedonistic. They're vengeful, pitiless, exploitive, manipulative, dishonest. They'll cheat to win. They're highly prejudiced, racist, sexist, homophobic. They're mean-spirited, militant, nationalistic. They tell others what they want to hear, and they take advantage of suckers. Sound like a profile of somebody we might know?
Unbelievable. He checks every box.
He does. He is a poster boy. The right-wing authoritarian followers, a summary list of the personality testing. Not everyone will have every trait, but many will have most traits. They are both men and women. They're submissive to authority. They're aggressive on behalf of that authority, and conventional. Those are the criteria that put them in that category for social science. But also the testing shows they're highly religious. They have moderate to little education. They trust untrustworthy authorities. They're prejudiced, particularly against homosexuals, women, and followers of religions other than their own. They're mean-spirited, narrow-minded, intolerant, bullying, zealous, dogmatic, uncritical of their chosen authority, hypocritical, inconsistent, and contradictory. In fact, in the book, we spend some time, you'll recall, Tara, explaining how they have zero capability of critical thinking.
Yes.
They put their thoughts and their training in different silos, and they never find one or another that can pull out what they need when they want it, without even realizing how inconsistent and contradictory they can be. They're prone to panic easily. They're highly self-righteous. They're moralistic. They're strict disciplinarians. They're severely punitive. They demand loyalty and return it. And they have very little self-awareness. So those are broad profiles of who these people are. And what happens with the double highs, they appear to have the worst traits of both of these groups of personalities, and they somehow have collected the worst of it all and become the most dangerous, if you will, because of those personality traits. So there is a broad picture of these people.
John, it sounds like they took the Boy Scout oath and then looked up the antonyms to each of the descriptive terms.
Well,
that's frightening. That's really frightening to see that.
We don't know. Science doesn't know if this is nature or nurture that makes these people this way. Altmaier, who has spent so many years testing, particularly college students, 30, 40 years of testing college students, and then talking to them about it, he thinks that it is predominantly nurture. The parenting of these people, while they'll have a disposition when they're in a family that encourages these types of behavior, and that's why they happen to develop into right-wing authoritarians or social dominators. We didn't know Mary Trump was going to write a book, so we do spend time explaining the roots of Donald Trump's authoritarianism. And Mary Trump traces many of these as well. While she wasn't looking for authoritarianism in her uncle, she wanted to explain why he was the way he is. And we came to the same conclusion based on what we could find in the public record. And it's his father. His father was the dominant influence in his life and created the dangerous man we have today in the White House.
And Trump,
I would say,
go ahead.
I would say that the fact that he did not have a loving and nurturing mother is why he hates women so much, because his mother being infirm, she was also emotionally unavailable to him as a child. I read Mary Trump's book on that, so it really gave some context as to what happened to Trump as a child. That makes a lot of sense. Doesn't excuse him, but it makes sense. And yes, his father being a sociopath in a lot of ways didn't help. But the fact that he had an emotionally absent mother at a young age to help soothe him as a child, I think contributed to what we see with that nightmare in the White House today.
Yes, and this is very typical of what happens with these personalities that science has been able to document.
John, I think the point we need to make in wrapping up here is that this is a book that people should read regardless of whether Trump is reelected or not, because he was elected once. And there are other Trumps waiting to run, as you know. We're going to have a Trump primary, I guess, before the Republican primary for president. Maybe not in 2024, but eventually. And if Trump loses, maybe even as soon as 2024. This book is so revealing about the authoritarian nature of millions of voters. That's what fascinated me about it. It's a reflection of Trump, but it explains why he has made such a strong connection. Why, as he has said, he could go down to Fifth Avenue and shoot someone and they'd all applaud. Actually, I think he could commit mass murder and they'd still all applaud.
Happening now, Larry, arguably, right? COVID is a soft example of that.
Yes, and that's,
these people, you're right on, Larry. These people are going nowhere. They will be very much a presence in American politics after Trump is gone. Win, lose, or draw in this election, these voters are not going to be anywhere other than looking for the next leader. They'll stay supportive of Trump as long as he can give them some assurance that he somehow is in charge, or they have a reason to remain attracted to him. But as he fades, they and their like will remain. What I suspect, Larry, has happened to this amazing amount of money he raised, the 800 million that's kind of vanished, is they've spent a lot of that money quietly, and we don't know about this, but we'll see it, is registering voters who now fit these profiles. Because these are a lot of people who have been ignored, who've never voted. And I have noticed in some states, they're talking about a substantial increase in Republican voters of previous voting people. Well, this would be a smart thing to do. We don't believe there's enough to put him over the top and elect him and win the Electoral College, but we don't know for certain. Nobody knows. They weren't aware of this science when they went into it. I'm sure they're aware of it now. The Cambridge Analytic people were hovering around it without nailing it right down, but getting the profile of the people who were attracted. So this is a very telling election, a very frightening election, and hopefully we get through this without the adverse consequences that are so readily available with authoritarians hanging around and wanting more of it.
Well, if there is an upset, we'll have a book to help us through it. And even if there isn't an upset, we have a book here that can help us understand what we're going to see more of. There's no way that we're not going to see more of it, because there are so many people who will remember Trump fondly and will try to find a substitute for him, maybe in Trump's own family. John Dean, I'm so pleased that you were able to join us. I appreciate the commitment of time that was involved. And again, I want people to order through Amazon, of course, or any other service, Authoritarian Nightmare, Trump and his followers. And his followers are going to outlast Trump by decades. You need to know this. You need to read it. And I just congratulate you on a terrific book, John. I hope it's a bestseller. It's better than the books that scream. This talks to us in a way that will help us in the future.
Thank you, Larry. I always enjoy your work and visiting.
Thank you very much, John. Appreciate it. And we'll do it again. Thanks a lot. Okay.
Next up is Senator Bill Nelson. He is a former U.S. Senator who represented Florida in the U.S. Senate from 2001 to 2019. He served in the U.S. Army Reserve for 6 years, saw active duty for 2 years, and earned the rank of captain. He launched his political career in 1972 when he was elected to the Florida House of Representatives in 1972. And he was then elected to the U.S. House of Representatives, where he served 6 terms from 1979 until 1991 before running successfully for the U.S. Senate. In 1986, he became only the second sitting member of Congress to travel into space, where he served as a crew member on board the Space Shuttle Columbia. Nelson, who was chair of the House Space Subcommittee, began his astronaut training at the Johnson Space Center in Houston in September of 1985, which is very cool. During the successful 6-day space flight, he and the crew launched a communication satellite and performed several experiments in materials processing and astrophysics, including an infrared imaging experiment and a handheld protein crystal growth experiment. Senator Nelson earned his BA in political science from Yale University and received his law degree from the University of Virginia School of Law. Welcome to Senator and former astronaut Bill Nelson. Larry?
Thanks a lot, Tara. And we are truly pleased to have Senator Bill Nelson here. I'm taping this from Pavilion 4 on the lawn at the University of Virginia. And I'm delighted to say Senator Nelson and his wife have visited here. We had a great time with them. They talked to a lot of students, charmed them all. And we were very pleased to learn he was willing to give us about 20 minutes today to talk about what's happening in Florida. That's all anybody talks about. What's going on in Florida? So, Senator, what's going on in Florida?
Well, it could well be Florida, 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 although you're hearing Pennsylvania is the key. And I suppose in the Electoral College that Pennsylvania is the key. However, on election night, since a lot of our mail-in ballots have already been processed prior to election day, if all of them are able to be tabulated by putting them through the machines, we may well get a result out of Florida. And if it's a big win for Joe, that pretty well sets the stage, because there are very, very limited possibilities that President Trump could get enough electoral votes in the Electoral College if Florida goes to Joe.
You're absolutely correct. If he loses Florida, that is Trump, it's game over, and we might even be able to go to bed early. So see what you can do about that, Senator.
I'm going to work on it.
Okay. Look, we hear so much about the complicated Hispanic vote in Florida. Well, you had a long, successful career in Florida politics, and the last time it didn't work out well, but boy, that was close. That was a squeaker. You understand this as few do. Please explain to us how the Hispanic vote is breaking down and why.
Well, Miami has become the center of Latin America. And therefore, a lot of people have immigrated to Florida from all over Latin America. So it's not a particular group of Hispanics. You have all of the above. Most significant among all the components of the Hispanic vote in Florida are the Cuban Americans, and they are traditionally very Republican. There was a time where people thought that the age divide between the older Cubans that immigrated and the Cuban Americans that were born in the U.S. was going to be a big divide. That has been less so as we have seen how they have voted over the years. But there is a divide there. However, when you get to the second largest group of Hispanics, Puerto Ricans, they tend to be Democrat. And of course, especially in this election, I'm expecting them to be heavily Democratic because of all of the slights that President Trump has given to the island, including, you remember that memorable Trump in the aftermath of the hurricane throwing paper towels into the, but innumerable statement putting down Puerto Rico and Puerto Ricans over the intervening years. And so that's the second largest group, and they are, as a group, gaining on the Cuban Americans. But then you have all other from all over Latin America. You have Venezuelans that, because of the appeal that Joe Biden is a socialist, that they are trending more to the Republican candidate. But then others from all over Latin America, including Central America, you get a mix of everything. Some of the countries in Central America where Trump is trying to deny temporary protective status, I think that will be an issue. But in terms of the totality, you get that mix. And then add on top of that, Mexican Americans, which are much less in number than you see in other states, particularly the border states on the southwest U.S.
Senator, I've seen 1,000 polls as you have from Florida. And on the Hispanic vote, given those divisions, and you described them very well to us, it looks like Biden is still winning the Hispanic vote. He's just not winning it by the margin that other Democrats have. Maybe he's at 55. I'm just guessing 55 as opposed to 65. Is that about right, or do you think that things are changing?
The Republicans have made a real effort at Hispanic. But I think at the end of the day, save for the Cuban Americans, you're going to see that margin. If Joe gets upwards of 57, 58 of the total vote, for example, among Hispanics, that's going to be very good. I would think that you will see him in the mid 70s among Puerto Ricans. Miami-Dade County, where most of the Hispanics, save for Puerto Ricans, are concentrated. If Joe gets upwards of 60% of the total vote coming out of Miami-Dade County, that's going to serve him very well.
Well, that'll be critical, but of course, so's the senior vote, which you understand very well. And that's been a real surprise.
That's a surprise.
Go ahead. Yes. Tell us what's happening with seniors.
Well, much to my chagrin over the years in the Senate, the group 65 age and older has trended Republican. And I say to my chagrin because it wasn't Republicans that were trying to protect Medicare and Social Security. To the contrary, they were trying to do it in, privatize Social Security. Now Trump's saying, well, take away the payroll tax that funds the Social Security Trust Fund. That is, Larry, the change. The senior citizen component of the electorate, and in Florida, that's a sizable component, could be as much as 1/3 of the electorate. That has shifted to Biden, and I think it is primarily because of COVID, with some recognition and nod to Social Security, but primarily COVID. I think they're seeing how this has been bungled by Trump. And they don't like that one bit, particularly when they can't see their grandchildren.
And maybe even at the villages, huh? You think that's possible?
Even there, as tough a place as that is. By the way, one day I was campaigning with Biden. This is back a couple elections ago. And we ended up off the main route that we were going. Ended up in the middle of the villages, where an ice cream shop, because he loves ice cream. And they didn't know we were coming. And of course, they're just having a ball, and he's ordering ice cream. And all of a sudden, a crowd starts to build outside, and the Secret Service, I think this was the 12 re-election. Secret Service is getting nervous. They want to get him out of there and back on the campaign bus. So I went to get him, and I find him in the corner. He's just totally focused in talking to a woman, a senior citizen, who is so concerned about her grandson in Iraq.
Wow.
And is such a typical story about Joe Biden, because he really cares about other people. And he gives them that attention. And that happened in the middle of the villages.
Well, that's fascinating. And you remember at the convention, what really stuck in my mind in thinking back to the convention was that young man who stuttered, and that Joe Biden took the time and trouble, because he understood that problem, to help that kid. And I bet you he's still helping him. I mean, that's hardly any presidential politicians or presidents do things like that. So I think that stuck with a lot of people. Look, again, looking at your incredible mega state, that that is as complicated as California easily. Of course, everybody focuses on the I-4 corridor. What other key parts of Florida should we be keeping an eye on as we approach Election Day?
In the I-4 corridor, the county Pinellas, which is St. Petersburg, which, by the way, the Tampa Bay Rays are reigning supreme these days, having actually, they play in the city of St. Petersburg. That county has been a bellwether ever since Jimmy Carter. And it has voted for the Democratic, let me put it this way, it has voted for the person who won the presidency, not necessarily Florida, but won the presidency. You might take a look at it, but other than that, the swath of Central Florida across the midsection of the peninsula is in fact usually considered to be the bellwether, the swing part of Florida. Miami, Southeast Florida will go to the Democrats. Southwest Florida, Fort Myers, Naples, Sarasota will go to the Republicans. North Florida will go heavy for the Republicans because that's the rural part of Florida from Jacksonville to Pensacola. However, there's an enclave now. Jacksonville itself and its county are increasingly voting for Democrats. But that's not enough to offset that swath of Florida across North Florida. Therefore, it's the Central Florida I-4 corridor politically that will generally swing the state. But as you can see, our state is so divided that it's so close one way or another. I think the senior vote is going to be the one that's going to be key this time. And that's going to swing Florida to Joe Biden.
And even in a pandemic, do you think they will show up in their usual very large numbers, usually dominating the other age groups? Is that still going to happen?
They already are with mail-in ballots. As we speak, between the start of early vote, in-person voting in early vote sites, which started just 2 days ago, between that and the mail-in ballots, there's already over 3 million ballots cast in Florida.
Wow. It's just incredible to think about how they could even process that many early on. Let me put you on the spot here because we're running out of time. I know it's impossible. There are a million things that could happen between now and Election Day. But if you had to guess, I'm assuming you're thinking that it's Biden, by what kind of margin? Is it going to be another really close one, or will Biden be able to pad this a little bit?
I'm afraid it's going to be close. I hope not. But even if it is, if we have a pretty good idea on election night, that reverberates far beyond the boundaries of the state of Florida because of the implications for the Electoral College.
Plus, even if it's really close like that, it suggests that Biden will be able to win 270 fairly handily, given the groups that are in Florida that can be transferred to other states. So as always, we're watching Florida, Senator, and you are the source as far as I'm concerned. And I'm biased. You went to the University of Virginia Law School. I know Yale claims you, but we don't think that's important. We think the important part is that you went to UVA Law School, and we're very proud to claim you as a Wahoo, and we hope that you will stay associated with us and come and see us again.
Bless you, Larry. Thank you, and thank you for the public service that you render over the years to so many of us.
Well, you're very kind, Senator. I appreciate that very much, and we'll go ahead and can that and put it out as a TV ad. So thanks very much.